Evening, everybody. Welcome to our June meeting of the Mona Basin Historical Society. My name is Duncan. I'm the president of the society, and we have a pretty good meeting set up for tonight. That's English for meaning we're going to have a great meeting, but Okay, we'll start off with the land acknowledgement. The Mona Basin Historical Society acknowledges that our buildings and outdoor exhibition space are gathering places on the unceded ancestral land of the Kuzataka people, the traditional caretakers of their homeland. Bootsagoi. Bob said that was close enough. Okay, great. Okay, I have a few announcements before I start calling on other folks to speak. Maybe I should have used the the lectern. Okay. First one, next Saturday, June 14th, we have the Night of the Phalaropes. And Janet is going to give us some more information about that.
So yeah, we're pretty excited about this brand new event. And I do have flyers if anybody wants to take one home or take a picture of it. So we're going to be in this room, and the goal of the Night of the Phalarope is to raise a lot of money. We're doing it in conjunction with Rotary clubs from the Eastern Sierra and also from Oakland and other places. We're trying to get an international connection going and get a big grant from Rotary to be able to continue our student exchange program between Argentina and Mono Lake and Great Salt Lake with the Sisterhood of Saline Lakes. So our goal is to raise kind of in the thousands of dollars at this event. So we'll see how we do, but we're going to have wine tasting, wine sales. We're going to have all the side of the room is going to be art auction. The world famous Phalarope song will be sung. Our son Ryan will be here to talk about his research. And Marina just got on a plane today in Argentina, and she's the one that created this whole environmental education international vision. And she is going to be here that night to talk about how it started and the evolution. So we've had one group of students go from Mono Lake to Argentina last summer. Another group is going this year, and the Argentinians came last summer. And we're hoping another group of Argentinian students will be able to come next summer. So it's really a great opportunity to foster leadership in young people and conserve our saline lakes and celebrate the importance of saline lakes and the little phalarope bird that connects us between the hemispheres. Also, Randy Arnold, who would be here tonight if he could be, but he's at a graduation. He's having a reception the night before in Mono City. So I have flyers about that too. That'll be Friday the 13th at 5. If anybody wants to come and help them do a housewarming in Mono City. And there's more information on the flyer about that too. So I think that about covers it, Duncan.
Thank you, Janet. And we also have on June the 11th, Char Miller is giving a Science on Tap series. So you can learn about fire and forest ecology in the Eastern Sierra. It's going to be in the T-Bar Social Club in June Lake. And the title of the presentation is Burn Scars, Documenting the History of and Resistance to Fire Suppression. And Mono Lake volunteer training is taking place this weekend. Thanks, Janet. Okay, I do have an announcement about we requested $5,000 from the DeChambeau Creek Foundation, and we have received $4,500, and the check is in the bank as of today. So we have money for our interns, or our summer students for this summer. Okay, that's the end of my announcements. Anybody from the trustees with anything to report? Bob.
I don't think we announced either earlier that we did get a grant from from Mono County for $4,000 to as partial subvention for hiring a full-time museum manager who's sitting. Where'd he go? That's it there. Anyway, $4,000 for salaries there. $4,000. We're raising some money. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, anybody from the officers with anything to report? Our treasurer has raised her hand. Here's Ellen.
Hi, Ellen King, treasurer. And let's see, I am still coming up to speed on my job duties. I have been in the job for a year. You'd think I would know what I was doing. But unfortunately, right after I took the job last summer, I was diagnosed with a serious illness, which is now behind me, thank goodness. And I am now ready to take over. One of the things that I'm working on is meeting with our bookkeeper and just learning more about how the society operates. And the other thing I do, which isn't really a treasurer task, but I'm in town a lot, so I pick up the mail. And I wanted just to let our members know that we received a letter about a longtime member who recently passed away. And I think many of you will remember Jim Stewart. James Stewart, I'm not quite sure which he preferred. Mr. Stewart was a speaker at one of our Ghost of the Sagebrush events. Number of years ago. We were up at Ellery Lake, and he told us all about being a young boy growing up on Ellery Lake. At the time he spoke to us, he was 98 years old, and he was so full of life and full of memories and just a wonderful person. And we will miss him, and we were lucky to have him. So, Dave tells me he was 105 when he passed away. So, yeah, really wonderful man. So I think that's it from me.
And my mother's only 101. So, okay, next item on the, any other officers' reports? Okay. We have a new museum manager. He's just started this month. And his name is Ken. You need it. You need it for the Zoom. Okay.
Okay, short report here because we're only open 5 days. Okay, so the attendance for May, 5 days. In state, we had 51 groups of people visit, totaling 102 people altogether. People from out of state, there were 9 groups, 27 people. Came from Arizona, Idaho, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Utah, and Washington. Income for May, sales $96.43, donations $52. Inventory, book inventory is completed. The miscellaneous inventory, I'm still working on that one. I've done it 3 times and it's disappeared 3 times, so I'm still learning on the computer. General report: the museum opened 2 days later than anticipated due to the Inn fire. The first day was Sunday, 5/25. I had 3 days training from Robin, and since then so many questions have arisen. I'm grateful for help from Robin, Bob, and Rich. Enjoying questions from visitors and reading artifacts, files, books, and other research to gain as much knowledge as possible. 2 big groups we had were one school group from Truckee, total of 5 teachers and 20 students throughout the day. They split it up. And one group of the firefighters, thanks to the firefighters, 15 adults before they left.
Thank you, Ken. We're very pleased to have you. Next item on the agenda is the ghost tour. So, no.
They need to know. Give it summary. Give us.
We are going to do the early bird breakfast this year. And we're going to have our meeting. I sent it out earlier today so we can get it planned up really quick. Is it Friday morning that we do it? Is it Friday morning? Friday morning. Friday morning, bright and early. We get there at 4:30 in the morning and set up and are ready for people at 5 a.m. because birders are serious people. And they come with their coffee mugs in hand. And we really, really appreciate the support that they give us. So we will be there, and it's at the museum. So June 20th at 5 a.m. Yes.
That's Robin, and here's Janet again.
Yeah, also, the Women's League in Levining is going to do the Chautauqua dinner this year. Linda Door's doing soup for 250. So if anybody feels moved to come and help us deal with that, we're looking for volunteers, and just come see me. But we need like dishwashers, servers, welcomers, picking up the plates off the tables people. So yeah. And that'll be that same day, Friday the 20th at 4:30. The dinner starts at 5, so we'll be getting organized at 4:30 in this room. Yeah.
Thank you, Janet. And now Dave Carroll with the plans for the Lundy Ghost Tour.
So I've been mentioning it for a few months that we have a plan. The folks who are now operating the Lundy Resort are very enthusiastic about working with us this year for our Ghost of the Sagebrush Tour. And it is August. Let me look at my calendar here, make sure I got the date. Yeah, it's Friday night, the 22nd of August, and Saturday the tour is August 23rd, and it'll be up at Lundy. The resort is hosting us. They are providing us access and a place to do our dinner. We have yet to locate who's going to cater to that. Maybe Linda Dorr will. We'll see. We're looking for that to resolve that. And this week, Linda LaPierre, who is our resident expert on Lundy Canyon history, who lives up in Yarrington now, she's coming back for the summer. She tells us to camp this summer again in her trailer. And so when she gets here on Thursday, one of my objectives is to get her and Haley from the Lundy Resort together, and we will start talking about specific details. But tickets are not available yet, but that'll be one of the things we need to do really soon. And the other thing I need to do right now is bring up more chairs. So that's it.
Thank you, Dave. It's great to see so many people here this evening. It's just wonderful. Okay, our big event this evening is somewhere it's in my papers. Very pleased to welcome Richard Potashin and Nancy Hadlock. Again, old friends coming back to see us again. And their talk tonight is "The Hills Are Moving, the Sheepmen of Sheep Industry in Mono County as seen through the lives of 3 sheepherding families." And I would like Richard just to explain to us why he's known as Alkali before he starts.
Well, after I did my internship with the Mono Lake Committee, I needed an excuse to continue to come to the Mono Basin every summer. So me and Kathy DeBell started a canoe tour business, and we began giving ourselves all kinds of strange names that kind of connect to the local community. Kathy became the Playa Princess, and of course I became Alkali Flat. And I guess there is actually an Alkali Flat out in central Nevada. But then there was the Desert Peach and a few other folks. So, you know, kind of keeping with the times and the feeling of Desert Peach was Emily Strauss. That's what I heard. She flew in, huh? Flew out really quick. Yeah. So I know there's a lot of folks out there that we're not too familiar with, and we thought maybe everybody could just do kind of a quick introduction.
Well, I just wanted to ask a couple of quick questions because we don't have enough time for everybody to introduce. So I just want to know, kind of with this group, how many of you have ever been affiliated in some way, shape, or form with the sheep industry? I knew it. He walked in. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. How many of you are just familiar with sheep because you've seen them out in the field somewhere? How many are affiliated with sheep because you think of them as being those hooved locusts that John Muir talks about? Be honest. Come on. All right. So hopefully we'll give you a little bit different background into the sheep industry, kind of an introduction into what happened here, but it also reflects on the sheep industry throughout the Western United States. But I want to start out, some of you, I know a lot of you, everybody knows Richard. So that's trying to say it. But just to give you a little bit more of a background on Richard, in that he not only has been here in this area for quite a while, he is a historian. He's done a lot of research. He's an excellent historian. He's also an excellent artist and an illustrator. He's done murals. He is brilliant even on the guitar. He has a lot of very, very colorful things that he does in his life. So he's a wonderful person to hang out with. And we started out doing more of the arbor-glyphs. And one of the great things about working with Richard and being married to Richard, but working with Richard, is his ability to read trees. And that's how we kind of started down this road, was getting up into the arbor-glyphs. So, Richard.
And there are, you know, sheep and sheepherding is kind of what runs in Nancy's blood. On her mother's side, her grandparents came from the Spanish Basque country, and her grandfather, when he first came here, guess what his first job was? Sheepherding in northern Nevada. And when she moved on to other professions, also her father worked intermittently with a sheep company. What was his name? Echeverry? Yeah, Echeverry out of Reno, Nevada. Her father would haul water and other supplies to some of the sheepherder camps in that area. And then as far professionally, Nancy, I should back up and say she got to know arbor-glyphs at a very young age. I'm very jealous. Through all these great camping trips that her father took the family on. And professionally, she was a Park Service interpretive ranger. And I'm really jealous because she knew what she wanted to do, like when she was age 3, which was be a park ranger. And so she spent 40 years with the National Park Service. And since 2007, I'm proud to call her my better half, and enjoy the fact that we've shared this great sort of romance with each other and the trees as well. So again, we're very honored that the Mono Basin Historical Society has given us an excuse to come back to the Mono Basin. We're really glad to be here again. You know, when Owens Valley turns into the Ovens Valley, this is where we come. So also thank you to the Inyo National Forest Archives, which we looted extensively. A bit of information on this project comes from their archives as well, and continued support for arbor-glyphs and that type of thing. So.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. It's fine for us, but I don't know how it works for the Zoom. They don't have to see us. They just have to see that.
Looks great.
Okay. All right. So you can go ahead and next slide. We don't have a thing. So next slide. So again, as I said, this is kind of just a little bit of an introduction. When we started working on this, we have picked just a few families to illustrate what was a vast economic success story here in the Mono Basin area about sheep and the the sheep in the area. So we've just collected a few. So, okay. So I'll start out by talking a little bit about sheep in general.
Yeah, actually, this was a pretty astonishing little factoid to find out that the first sheep that came to America were smuggled in by the Pilgrims in 1635. England had wanted to keep a virtual monopoly on the wool industry, and so it was a crime to actually have sheep in the original area, territory, or colonies. As far as California goes, the first sheep showed up as a result of the mission system. The Padres and the Spanish brought in the first sheep into California. And then by the 1850s, there were roughly about 20,000 sheep in the state of California. But that just mushroomed in the next 30 years. There were a number, what was it, 70 million? No, it's 7 million sheep were all over California. So that's a little bit of background on how sheep got to the area. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how they ended up here.
So we all know pretty much what happened and during that time period and what the big push was for. Yeah, gold. Everybody came here from gold, including originally most of the sheep herders and the sheep owners came from gold. But what they discovered was even in areas like Bodie, which went from a small area to the town to a huge boom town, the big draw was not necessarily the gold, but how to mine the pockets of the miners themselves. And so in this case, it turned out to be sheep. But why sheep? You know, you need food, you need clothing, but why sheep? Yeah.
Yeah. What are we? Oh, I'm sorry. Why sheep? Yeah. Again, unlike cattle that tend to stray a bit, sheep tend to flock and stay together, sometimes to their own detriment.
And the other advantage is the fact that you only have to hire one person to manage 2,000 to 3,000 sheep. That's usually when the early years, that's what you had. When you had a band of sheep, you had 2,000 or 3,000 sheep for one herder. Of course, you also had dogs, which was a huge help. But it's much cheaper than hiring a bunch of cowboys.
And of course, no need to build fences or structures around when you have a herder kind of monitoring the movement of the sheep. And of course, let's not forget the dogs. The dogs were the right-hand man of those sheep herders.
And also sheep require less water than cattle, so they were more appealing for that reason, especially during this time period. There had been a drought pretty much in the western United States, and a huge amount of cattle had actually died, and they were looked at as not being very beneficiary at that time. So sheep were able to kind of sneak in right then and take advantage of that opportunity.
And basically, in the early days, we're looking at maybe the late 1800s into the 1900s. It was free range, and it basically was a free for all for sheep companies and transient sheepmen to get to that feed first and make a profit on their sheep and lambs.
And last but certainly not least, sheep will eat not just the nice juicy grass. They'll eat the bushes. They'll eat most of anything, not quite as much as goats, but they will eat just about anything. So they were able to keep into areas and go into areas where they couldn't go before. So the question we have, so where did all these sheep come from? As you pretty much figured they weren't living here in the Mono Basin.
So given the range conditions that were occurring in Southern California and throughout the state, sheep companies and transient sheep operators decided to move their flocks into the Sierra Mountains, Eastern Sierra area. And they came from a variety of different routes. You can see there's a sheep driveway heading up through the Central Valley and I think up over Sonora Pass. A major sheep driveway occurred between Bakersfield and Inyo and Mono counties. We call it the Sheep Freeway. Literally thousands of sheep along that walk. And from the western Nevada area and central Nevada, you can see another route coming in. So an enormous influx of sheep from all directions. And this includes, like I said, not just transient herders who really had no land base, but also established ranchers try to get in on that open range, free range, free feed arrangement.
And kind of try and emphasize that we have picked three families that we call kind of three sheep dynasties that were in this area. But as you can tell, we've made just a short list of some of the people that you might recognize. Everybody from the Wedderts all the way down to the Blackwells that were within this area running sheep at that time period. Again, it's hard to emphasize how big an industry this was at that time. Oh, okay, we got two. That's right. Sorry about that. So the question is, so when they got here, where did they graze?
So basically, the whole Mono County area was covered with sheep outlets. You can see the S&G stands for sheep and goats. So these were the allotments that were set up to manage some of the grazing. Tres Plumas refers to the White Mountains. Again, thousands of sheep were grazed in the White Mountains from the early teens of up until the 50s and 60s. The Mono Lake area, Mono Basin around June Lake. You can see Hot Creek, Alger Lake area. Go ahead. And then Long Valley was a popular grazing area. Hilton Creek, Convict Creek, Casa Diablo. I mean, it's literally almost the whole entire county of Mono. And then I think there's one more slide there. Now we're looking at sheep allotments in the Glass Mountain area, Black Canyon around Benton. Benton was a key hub for sheep ranchers at that time. So, and then of course north of there as well. We don't have allotments on that one yet.
So the question we ask is, where did they graze? The better question is, where didn't they graze? And you have all that open area, you have all these great ranchers and all these people, and you have them all grazing on the same progress of land. Something's going to happen. Go ahead. Somebody's going to want to put in regulations. Somebody's going to be upset. So this is when most of the regulations started, both through government agencies, but also promoted by the people who lived in this area. So we have things like at the very beginning, 1891, the Forest Reserve Act. So that was one of those times when they were just beginning. This is the beginning of the Forest Service. Before the Forest Service existed, the Forest Reserve Act began setting aside parcels of land. The interesting thing about the Forest Reserve Act is that initially it banned both sheep and cattle grazing within them.
Right, and then that ban was lifted in 1900 by the Interior Department, who had responsibility for these forest reserves. And then the other key year is 1905, when the Forest Service is actually created under the Department of Agriculture. And that's when we see the first signs of a grazing management system. And basically, if you were wanting to apply to graze your sheep on a national forest, you need to submit a permit for grazing. You also had to pay grazing fees, which kind of caught the cattle people kind of off balance a little bit. And you had a specific range or allotment that you were allowed to graze in. So in those days, a ranger would count your sheep before they were let onto the range. And the whole idea behind this system was to eliminate these transient, referred to as tramp herders and sheepmen, predominantly Basques, who were coming into these areas, and according to the cattle people and the Forest Service, were completely degrading the range. It wasn't as simple as that.
So the other big system that came in was the Taylor Grazing Act in 1934. And the reason for that act kind of comes back to what Richard was saying as far as the tramp herders. This was an act that said that you had to own property in order to be able to graze in certain areas. Or if you didn't own property, you would be rated, you were given a rating, and you would be at the very bottom to be able to get an allotment for grazing. So it was very, very targeted toward the immigrant population, specifically the Basques, but it was targeted toward them to keep them out and off of their grazing areas. Again, one of the great surprises for people on the Taylor Grazing Act was the fact that it did apply to sheep, but it also ended up applying to cattle, which was not what the cattlemen were vying for at the time when this was going on. So they were a little shocked when that came out. They were upset that they were under the same regulations as the sheep herders as well. So that made it tougher for them, and they weren't happy about that. They actually, this was all fought in courts, and they all lost. I mean, it was one of those things that was put into law.
Right, and that document that you see on the bottom of the screen there, another restrictive ordinance was a sheep license that was established in the mountain counties of the Eastern Sierra, and that was actually challenged by a number of sheep owners. It went to court. It went all the way to the California Supreme Court. They tested the constitutionality of creating these grazing allotments. And unfortunately, they lost the case. The constitutionality of the whole grazing system, which is basically what we have today, was upheld. I just wanted to add about the Taylor Grazing Act that it refers to the land that is now under the BLM. So all the other public domain lands, excluding the forest, the national forest, came under the Taylor Grazing Act system.
So what we did is we've been doing a lot of research, and we finally decided that we looked at 3 different families that were in this area during that time period and how they coped with all those regulations that we just talked about, and how they coped with all the conditions of that has to do with range, open range, and sheep herding and running a sheep operations, and how they managed to actually be successful and be names that people recognize to this day in various areas. The first one was Giroux. Second one's going to be Sario, and our last one will be the Menaburos. So one thing we wanted to emphasize about this was that all 3 of those people were immigrants. And during this time period, of course, we're talking the early 1900s, and they were coming to the United States to make a better life for themselves. In the case of the Basque country was in depression, and so a lot of their young men were trying to find work because they didn't have work in the Basque country, and their families, they couldn't inherit the farms. Only one person could inherit, and so they had nowhere to go and nothing to do. So they started coming to the United States. They came in search of a better life. They did not necessarily have a background in sheep herding, but they did have a background in some animal husbandry. Some did. And so they came to the United States thinking that, and that would be the Mendoburo and Sario. And then Giroux family came from southern France. And their family, when they originally came from a little different reason. There was problems going on in that area, and they didn't want to serve in the military. So one of the ways to get out of the military was to come to the United States. But they could also better their families and better their lives through coming here. So that's why they came here in the early 1900s. No, it's you.
So what made these 3 sheep herding dynasties, if we may call them, successful? Work ethic. They could read the land very well. They knew where the good feed was. They knew what the environmental conditions were there, when the feed was good, when to move their sheep. The other thing was these guys had very little formal education, but they were great businessmen. They knew how to manage finances and just the business, the hard work of business, not only with the sheep, but financially. And they established themselves as landowners, buying up property in Mono County and Kern and Inyo, because as we stated earlier, that's who was favored in this allotment system. You established landowners who had an established ranch, who put up hay and had a home base, were favored over the transient sheepmen, the aliens, basically. So these guys figured it out pretty good. They could navigate the system really well. And the other thing was they knew who to partner with. They went through a lot of partners. All 3 of these sheepmen that we're profiling today. So it's a lot of different factors that go into success.
So I said we're going to kind of start with Giroux, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Pierre, which is the younger brother, kind of in the far right-hand corner here. So Pierre, along with his brother, along with Alfred and his sister Frances, were born in France. And Pierre was the first one who came, and he was the older brother, even though he was called Little Pete. Apparently he was a little tiny guy, so everybody called him Little Pete. So Little Pete came, and he started dealing in the sheep industry, and he sent a letter back to his younger brother. And you can see here is it is the place where grazing is free and feed can be had for the taking. A man can get rich here. So how could his brother resist?
Right. So actually, Pete sent money over for Alfred's passage to America. And of course, to pay him back, he became a sheep herder for Pete. And that's how he started herding sheep in the Mojave area and in Yokern in the Coso Hot Springs area. And eventually acquired enough sheep. Oftentimes he would be paid in sheep rather than wages, and built up a herd and broke off on his own. He, again, as we mentioned about partnerships, he had a number of partners, and initially in about 5 years established himself as a prominent sheep rancher in West Bishop, amongst other locations.
So as we go through and talk about these individuals, I mean, certain things come to light. They aren't just sheep herders. They aren't just businessmen. They had lives. Excuse me, they had interesting stories. And I think Pierre Giroux, Little Pete, had some of the more interesting of those interesting stories. He was a sheepman, and he was known as a sheepman, and he was out on the range quite a bit. And everybody kind of was familiar with him. But he also did other things. He managed at one point to shoot a grizzly bear. At that time period, there weren't a lot of grizzly bears left in California. And if you read some of the records, some people claim he was the one who shot the last grizzly bear in California. Most likely, maybe he shot the last grizzly bear in some part of the Eastern Sierras, but he did shoot it. And the question was, why would you shoot a grizzly bear now? But at the time, was it threatening his herd, his sheep? Could very well have been threatening his sheep, could very well have been threatening him. There's part of the story says that there might have been a cub nearby, and that it was being very, very defensive. So he was defending himself. For whatever reason, he was just known as the man who shot the grizzly bear. The other interesting part, he also married a Native American woman in the Bishop area, and they had 2 children. And his death becomes an interesting story as well. He died very young, and the death was written up as a suicide. But according to a lot of the other records, they're not sure. He was shot in the head, and it is possible that he shot himself in the head. But one of the stories is, did he mean to kill himself? Now, that may sound funny, but what the point was, he had been having these really bad headaches. And one of the medical theories at the time was that if you could relieve some of the pressure in your head, relieve some of the blood and pressure, you wouldn't have so many headaches. So, of course, his family said he wasn't really committing suicide. He was just trying to relieve that pressure.
I recommend that you try that.
Yeah, don't try this at home. So again, very interesting character, interesting stories, and very well thought of it by his brother as well. His brother actually put a monument up to him in the Big Pine Cemetery, and you can find that there today.
Well, you can see the extent of Alfred's grazing areas, predominantly in the southern Mono County area. You can see the White Mountain area just on the border of Nevada there. So he established sheep camps there in the White Mountains, as well as the Benton area. He worked out of Benton into the Glass Range, and he acquired a number of grazing permits and allotments for the Long Valley area. I mentioned earlier Hilton Creek, Convict Creek, all these areas that are now sort of recreational paradises were grazed by a large number of sheep that belonged to Alfred Giroux, and then heading on towards the west, towards the Mono Mills area and that area as well. So pretty well established.
So Alfred also had a family and a history outside of just sheep herding. And he did marry. He married early on to a woman from his hometown in France named Sylvie. And according to what we've been able to come up with, Sylvie, when she came to the United States, either came with tuberculosis or the tuberculosis got bad enough to be able to identify when she came here. So they left and went back to France so she could be with her family in order to die. However, in the meantime, before her death, she and Alfred managed to have 2 children while they were in France. So both Frank and the daughter Clarice were born in France. So once she passed away, Alfred didn't wait too long. He managed to find a second wife and returned to the United States. And he did have several children after that. Alfred was known for being out on the range most of the time and not necessarily the most social of individuals, but we at least know he at least was home at least 6 or 7 times.
He wasn't out on the range, he was making babies. In an industry like sheep ranching, it's ups and downs all over the place. And dealing with a commodity like wool or lambs, markets fluctuate tremendously. This was one of the better years for Alfred. There's 40 tons of sheep in that picture. Oh, really? Sorry. Wool, and that wool got shipped out across the Pacific through the Panama Canal and ended up in Boston. On its journey, it acquired 3 more tons of tropical air. So it added 3 more tons of weight to his original wool. So he came in at 43 tons at 88 cents per pound. So a pretty good year, 1924 for Alfred Giroux. But again, being able to manage those really good years, set aside those resources, those financial windfalls, because there's going to be some pretty down years coming along in the future as well. And Alfred was recognized as a prominent sheepman by the fact that he was established as an advisor to the Taylor Grazing Act. We mentioned it in 1934. So he oversaw some of the Act provisions as an agent for Inyo, Mono, and Kern County.
Oh, perfect. That's it. Yeah, we're good. Yep. So one of the things that I find most fascinating about Alfred Giroux is the fact that you can find lots of photographs of him, including some of the areas like Long Valley, down in Inyo County, where he was actually herding sheep. So there aren't a lot of historical photographs of these people out actually doing the work that they did, but possibly because he was so well known, maybe it's when the newspapers were out there and they wanted to get a picture of somebody so they could acknowledge that the sheep were in the area. But a lot of the times and a lot of the photographs that we've been able to locate were of Alfred Giroux.
And as his life wound down, he sold off his sheep and sort of retired to a small ranch in West Bishop. And from there, he kept a small group, maybe 5 or 6 sheep, kind of for nostalgia purposes. But one day, he had a ram in that group, and a ram got spooked, and he was holding onto the rope with the ram attached, and so the ram just dragged him through the sagebrush, mangled his arm very severely, almost died from loss of blood. But they got him to the hospital and saved his life. And about a year after that, he donated anonymously a $25,000 check to Northern Inyo Hospital in gratitude for what they had done for him. He also, again, wanted to remember the early nostalgic days, and he actually wrote a small booklet called My First Winter in California, profiling his life that first season as a sheep herder in Kern and Inyo counties. We kind of refer to that as the counterpoint to John Muir's My First Summer in the Sierra. And he liked to go back in his retirement years to where he started, out in Inyo Kern, sitting on a rock, looking out at the mountains where he grazed thousands of sheep, and basically said, I've had a good life. It's time to go. And he died at 85. He's buried in the Bishop Cemetery. Right.
As we said, these are kind of dynasties. Just because Alfred passed away and Pierre was gone doesn't mean that was the end. Alfred had that elder son that was born in Spain, was born in France, and he was interested in the sheep business as well. So he actually started his own sheep business. And Frank had the area up around Little Round Valley Meadows for a long time. So that was an area that was grazed over periods of time with them. And he also got married, had children, and he loved herding sheep. But the one quote that's up here is kind of a reminder of, again, kind of, what sheep herding is all about. So this is by Alfred Giroux Jr., an oral history that Richard had conducted. It says, well, my half-brother, Frank, in 1941 came from Lancaster with 3,500 head of sheep, 3 burros, and he says, I forgot how many dogs. There was a sheep trail that went from Lancaster, Bakersfield, that area up into this area, and it was very commonly used. And Frank was part of that industry. But Frank also passed away, and unfortunately, none of his children really were interested in getting into the sheep business. But that doesn't mean that the name has been forgotten.
Right. There is a Giroux peak named in the Sierra Nevada for Little Pete Giroux. So they're kind of their legacy lives on. You might ask, well, where the heck is this located? If you hiked up from South Lake over Bishop Pass and dropped down into the Doozy Basin, well, just to the north of there is Giroux Peak. So honoring that story and that history. So, and from there, we have another gentleman who had a considerable impact economically on Mono County.
So kind of our next dynasty was the Josario family dynasty. And Josario came here very early on. He came in about somewhere around 1905 or 1906. And he came from a little tiny town in the Basque Country. It was just Linzoen. And the carving that's up there, it's very hard to read, but if you got close to it, it says Linzoen Dara, which means I'm from Linzoen. And it was not carved by Josario, it was carved by one of his herders, a gentleman by the name of Antonio Urrutia. Okay. So he brought a lot of people from that area. Is kind of the point. You see a lot of Linzoen listed as the herders come into this area. So that's one of the things that helped create his dynasty is the amount of Basque and the amount of people herders that he brought in. But he came very early on. He came on ship. That's what the trunk is from, as he came here. And then by 1910, he was actually working out of Smith Valley. He was working then as a herder, sometimes camp tender. And then in his quote-unquote spare time in the evenings, he worked as a bartender. And that's one of the things we think of when we think of how come these men were so successful. Well, some of it's just they're just very hardworking. They're saving lots of money. They're doing everything they can to be a success in this new country and to bring money. So if you can imagine, he is a sheep herder in 1910. By 1915, he's already learned probably one of the most valuable lessons in this area is that you have to own land. So he purchased the land of another Basque by the name of Latapi, who owned the Huntoon Ranch. So most of you have probably passed by the Huntoon Ranch along 395, and that's what became their summer ranch. But he didn't stop there. He kept buying land. That was one of Sario's biggest things. He started his own company, Mono Land and Livestock Company, and in 1921, he purchased Green Creek, Summers Meadow, and various other smaller pieces of property from the Alpine Land and Livestock Company. So eventually, he keeps buying land, he keeps getting sheep, and pretty soon he has up to 50,000 acres of land between Mono and northern Nevada. And then he also has over 12,000 sheep that he's herding, which went pretty quick when you come here somewhere around 1905, not speaking the language and not knowing anything.
So that original Huntoon Ranch burned down, I believe it was 1951. And the Sario family built the current residence on the left side of the highway. This is about 8 or 9 miles north of Bridgeport. So you pass by those two buildings. The building on the right was formerly the boarding house for Sario sheepherders. And you can see some of his holdings there, predominantly north and south Swagger Canyon. Again, Nancy mentioned Green Creek, Summers Meadow, and a portion just outside of Mona County in Silver Creek as well. Now, in addition to the ranch property and his own private residence, if you got Basque sheepherders around, you better have a bread oven to bake sheepherder bread in. So that's a picture of it's a better day for that bread oven, because just the other day we went by the house and that oven is just completely collapsed under the roof of that. The roof just collapsed in, so it's kind of sad, but they still have that house there, the extended Sario family. So.
So Sario, along with being a very, very good sheep herder and understanding how to buy land, he also understood people. And he got very well known within the community throughout Carson City, Minden, Gardnerville, to the point that almost every time something happened, his name would appear in the paper, or a family name would appear in the paper. So when he first got married, when he married Josephine in Cabe, it was about a quarter-page picture, which during that time period is pretty predominant. And plus the fact that he was Basque, which was a very big deal because they were still being somewhat prejudiced against. So he was represented there. Every time when his two daughters, when Leonie and Beatrice were born, that hit the papers. That was a big deal. Whenever, as they got older, the daughters and the mother or whatever, they went anywhere, it appeared in the social columns. If they were to a wedding, it was in the social columns. If they were attended a funeral, he was a pallbearer, it appeared in the papers. So he was extremely well known throughout that community. And you could trace a lot of what he did through just going through a lot of the newspaper articles. And part of the reason for that, again, was because he was Basque. Minden, Gardnerville, Carson City had a large Basque population. But predominantly because he did really good things for the Basque people.
And he hired a lot of Basque herders, dependable people that he could count on. His wife also was a key part of his operation, behind the scenes. She probably kept the books, and also helped these struggling new sheep herders to kind of get in their bearings in a new community. She'd probably take them to dental and medical appointments, help them with other key issues, everyday issues as well. So we have Josephine on the left there, and then what was it again? Yeah, we have Pierre Mocho and Michelle Mocho, and another gentleman in the middle there. So they went out and herded sheep in Green Creek and Swagger. And of course, when we went in there to document arboglyphs, guess what we found? We found their names on there. So a really personal, strong connection to the Sario ranching enterprise.
And as Richard mentioned earlier, the sheep business is kind of up and down. I have a bumper sticker on my car that's, sheep herding is not for sissies. And the sheep business is the same. Things are up and down constantly. And Sario knew how to weather those situations. A lot of people lost their businesses during some of these time periods. During World War I, there was a lack of shepherds at first, and there was also a very, very low price for lamb, a very low price for wool. And at that point, mutton was just, nobody ate mutton after that, during that time period. So trying to find somebody to buy what you were offering was difficult. By the second big hit was the Depression. And there are stories of sheep ranchers taking their sheep because they couldn't get the banks to buy back the sheep. They had invested in the sheep and the banks wouldn't buy them back. So they threatened to bring them into town and drive them into the banks to force the bank presidents to actually give them their money. And and Sario was able to weather those as well. He was a very good businessman. And finally, coming to World War II, there were no herders. Everybody was being shipped off to war. So as a result, they had to come up with some other means. And by the middle of the war, they actually opened up, they had closed the borders for the importation of specifically Spanish Basque sheep herders for that time period. So now they opened them back up, but they had to be selected and brought in as individuals or as groups, as groups. And one of the acknowledgments of Sari, you can read here, basically he was selected to pick the very first sheep herders who came in during that time period. So that was a great honor for him. And it just illustrates how well thought of he was within the sheep industry.
But eventually, the rigors of running a sheep business kind of got to Sario. He had an operation, a serious major operation. Of course, you hope that he recovers, but roughly about a month after his operation, he finally passed away. And judging from the amount of people who were at the funeral, you can kind of get an idea of how prominent and important he was, not only in the Basque community, but the sheep ranching community. Most of his pallbearers were his old sheep herder buddies. And he rests in peace now in the Gardnerville Cemetery. But again, it's not the end of the Sario dynasty.
Yeah, surprisingly, once he passed away, Josephine, his wife, stepped in and started taking over the industry. And she did a very good job as much as she could. But for a woman to run a sheep industry during that time was difficult. For example, women could not get loans, and trying to run any sort of ranching industry without being able to get a loan is tough. So she wisely hired really accomplished help, one of which was a man by the name of Presto. Ramon Presto came from the same town as her husband, came from Ninzawain, and he began helping out as the camp tender and out in the sheep, herding the sheep. Eventually she brought him in and had him helping in the business. And he was pretty smart himself because he actually fell in love with their oldest daughter, Beatrice, and married her. So that's what kind of continued the sheep industry for the Sario family. It became the Sario Presto family, and they maintained mono land and livestock industry up until the 1980s, at which point in 1982, they sold the sheep to another person who had some industry, which was the I&M Sheep Company, which stood for Ituriria and Mendaburo. And Mendaburo is going to be our next topic.
Right, like the other two gentlemen we've profiled. Gregorio Mendaburo was the gentleman who got it all rolling. And he was an immigrant from the Spanish Basque country, and he shows up in the Bakersfield area pretty early on. And in 5 years, again, he's built up his herds, and he bought a ranch. He's got a land base to work from. Again, given the priority that landowners had in the allotment arrangement. By 1924, he's also a wool purchasing agent for Kern, Inyo, and Mono County. So he's dealing with a lot of sheep companies in terms of wool. And then they organized trade organizations, and he's a founding member and first president of the Kern County Wool Growers Association. And also, like Alfred Drew, sits on the board as a sheep man for the Taylor Grazing Act compliance as well. But the other important feature in his life is that he partners with a Jewish livestock owner. I call him a Jewish cowboy. His name is Oscar Rudnick. And so you have this Basque and this Jewish guy get together. So we decided to form a partnership just kind of along those lines. Basco marries Jewish guy. And so one of their key areas in terms of their grazing companies was the Mono Basin. Go ahead. So there was a number of different sort of offshoots of the M&R Mendaburo Rudnick Company. You have there's the Mono Sheep Company, there's the Inyo Sheep Company, I&M, Ituria, and Mendaburo, and then eventually the Mendoboro Land and Livestock Company, which you see it's pretty much centered around the Mono Basin. They had allotments around the Mono craters. They had allotments on the other side of the craters, Dry Creek, Mono Mills, Alger Lake, the intake, Shaft Camp 1. So they kind of built a bit of an empire just within the Mono Basin area. And their headquarters was at the Cane Ranch, which was the headquarters for the City of Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. So for over 60 years, they centered their operation there and grazed out there. Probably some of you remember seeing their sheep out in the meadows just north of, or I should say west of Cane Ranch.
And once again, they aren't just sheep herders and sheep owners. They have lives. And in his case, he married, there was a connection in the Bakersfield area called the Noriega Hotel where everybody kind of congregated. And he was able to meet a lady, a very nice Spanish Basque lady that he met there, Euelia. She was from Elizondo, and they got married, and then they settled down and they had children. They had two children. The first children they had was Joe or Jose. We'll hear more about Joe as we go along. And then they had two daughters, Marcelina and Julie. And again, just like with Sario, he hired a lot of Basques to come in. And two of the Basques that he hired were Bessenart and Crochet. And wise thinking, Bessenart and Crochet eventually became his son-in-laws. One married Marcelina, one married Julie. So they were thinking ahead in terms of the ranching business, but in a maybe a little bit different way. Mendoboro was very well known. He advanced the industry, but again, he died at a very young age. This business can kind of wear at you. But like with the others, it wasn't the end of the business. It was just the end of Gregorio.
And his son, Joe or Jose Mendoboro, picked up the ball from Gregorio and turned the Mendoboro Land and Livestock Company into one of the largest open range sheep and cattle operations, not just in Mono County, but throughout California and Texas and Arizona. At one time, he employed over 100 Basque sheep herders. And they also had a ranch operation in Cantil in the Mojave Desert as well. But these guys were workaholics. I mean, that they had to do that to build up what they did. And this quote really bears that out. He never missed a day of work, not even an occasional vacation. His day always involved the purchase of sheep and cattle. He loved working alongside his faithful and longtime employees, some of which were his nephews and cousins.
Yeah, Gregorio originally brought several of his nephews to the United States to herd sheep. We see the name Mendoboro carved on a lot of trees. And right at the moment, we've been seeing this one with Jose Maria Mendoboro. We see that a lot on the tank we're working on too. He apparently likes to communicate with the outside world. Unfortunately, it's all in Basque, and I'm not sure what he's trying to say. But we've seen a lot. And Jose Maria, he loved herding sheep. The quote down that he did what he loved for 42 years. And he took kind of that industry working originally for his uncle and then for his cousin Joe, and then he started his own business in Bakersfield, also herding sheep. So they advanced that industry. And then his cousin, their cousin, again, Juanito Mendoboro, herded sheep for Gregorio, then for Joe, and finally for himself. And that's his brand. That JM is the Juanito Mendoboro brand. But I'm just going to use this quote and kind of read it because it expresses a little bit about the sheep industry, probably better than anything that I could say. So when I started working for Gregorio, I was a sheep herder for 4 years. I remember one long move from Mojave to Bodie Mono Lake area. It took 40 days, and it was just the donkey and us. I spent the next 11 years as a camp tender, sometimes fixing irrigation lines and hauling hay in summer months. I lived at the Mendoboro Ranch most of the year in northwestern Bakersfield and in Lee Vining for the summer months.
What Juanito forgot to mention is that he had some really great sheep herder partners at the Mono Inn. So we talked early on about what are the advantages of sheep in the Mono County area, but those positives became negatives as we see through time and the changes that occurred. When you look at the flocking tendency, again, starting in the 1930s, recreation became an important industry in the Eastern Sierra. Campgrounds are starting to be established, so you can't herd your flocks normally where you used to because there's specific regulations that you have to stay away from organized recreation campgrounds. Again, fire was an issue as well too. So the emergence of the recreational industry and tourism too had a really important effect on the future of sheep in this area.
Yeah, the sheep industry started dying, actually coming down pretty much in the 1930s and progressed on from there. One of the big issues is the herders. It was very, very difficult to get herders. Nobody wanted to come. The Basque Country had made lots of money. The France was doing well, so they started recruiting from areas such as Peru, Argentina, Mexico. But on top of that, not only did they have to recruit herders, they had to change the entire ways that the herders were taken care of. In the old days, you just gave them a donkey piled up with provisions and you send them out into the field. Well, you can't do that anymore. So that becomes very, very costly. Whereas before it was really cheap to have herders.
There was still no need to build fences, but you were pretty much hemmed in by your allotment. And, early on there was a great deal of abuse in terms of trespassing issues, where one sheep company might trespass on another, go into their ranch and clean out the feed. It also happened between sheepmen and cattlemen as well. But again, you were pretty constrained by your allotment boundaries, and the Forest Service made very clear where those boundary lines were, and you were liable to legal recourse if you crossed over those.
And the same became true of water. They may need less water, but they still need water. And being able to just take them down to a creek or down to a lake was no longer an option. You had to provide for them. You had to truck the water along with them because you couldn't just free for all go out anywhere you wanted to, partially because of losing the creeks, partially because a lot of these areas were no longer open range, were longer just available.
And of course, free range had disappeared for many years, and a number of these sheep men, feel like the walls are closing in on us. So no more free range. It's pretty organized. And another key factor was the drop in demand of sheep products, especially wool. We started to see synthetics. All of us probably wear some kind of fleece, synthetic coverings, and ironically, it says Benton Springs on there, but that's just a.
And then, of course, the demand for mutton was non-existent, but even the demand for lamb went down. It was not something that's is any longer considered to be one of the primary foods. And what little lamb is available is generally brought in from Australia and New Zealand, and it's much cheaper to do as an import than it is to actually raise them here. So there's a huge amount of competition along with that.
And then we see, the change in regulations and an environmental movement emerging in the 60s and 70s, which led to policy such as the Endangered Species Act, where certain species of plants, animals, fish are now currently protected. And so that removed some of these areas from sheep grazing as well.
And probably the one that's gotten the most publicity recently is the interaction with bighorn sheep. The idea that the domestic sheep can spread diseases to wild sheep. And when you're trying to reintroduce a species as limited as the bighorn sheep, having domestically too close was too much of a danger, and that had to be eliminated. So a lot of the grazing, the trails themselves were taken out of use, and many of the specific grazing areas were taken out of use as well. And it's kind of just because these darn bighorn rams just love those nice little tame ewes. They're kind of randy rams.
One of the other really key factors as we go through these three sort of different dynasties was the fact that we talked about one generation taking over from the older generation, but at some point, these younger generations of these sheep families didn't want to put in all that hard work. I mean, it's seriously a hardcore business to run financially and being out in the field. So they decided, there was other ways to earn a living.
Yeah, just kind of thinking back on the three that we've seen, Giroux started out and he passed it on to his son, who passed it on to his son eventually to George, who was unable to keep that up as a business. We look at Sario. Sario tried, he had daughters, and the daughters did get involved in the sheep industry. But again, it's a lot of work. They didn't have children who wanted to take that on as well. So again, it had to be sold off to Ituria and Mendaburo. And the same thing happened with Mendaburo. He had a son who took it on, and the son after that also took on the industry and was unable to keep it successful. So even though in certain point they may have wanted to, they didn't have the push and the drive and the enthusiasm that the original family had. So they were unable to keep that going as a family. And that has become so common in much of ranching industry, but very specifically within the sheep industry. So the next question is, so is there anybody left out there herding sheep?
Right. What's the present look like in Mono County? Well, we know of two operators still running sheep. One of them is Joe Echenique out of Bakersfield, who is centered in Little Round Valley. We mentioned that Frank Giroux originally grazed there, and so he comes up with his sheep every early summer. And, you're driving up past Tom's place. There's a beautiful little meadow off to the left there. You still may see sheep there as well. And the other established sheep operation, I'll let Nancy take that one.
Because he doesn't want to say Ituria. The other family, and it is a family, is the Torredia family, and they are also out of Bakersfield. And they herd predominantly in the Bodie areas within those foothill areas in and around Mono County. And again, if you're heading toward Bodie, you might actually see the sheep up there. You may see their sheep dogs running around. So they're still an operating sheep business, and they do some trailing of sheep as well. So they're still there. And then there's two others that are on the periphery. We don't know if they're still in operations. There's a family out of, in Dayton, Nevada, by the name of Borda, who used to bring their sheep into the Twin Lakes area. We were unable to find out if they're still doing that. And then the Fullstone family, which did bring sheep in even locally here, and we're just not sure if they're crossing into the Mono Basin area at all right now. So that's kind of the situation presently. So we have gone from hundreds of sheep operations to the possibility of maybe 4, probably 2. And so there is a huge reduction in that. And that's what we wanted to kind of present here tonight, was just to give an idea of how that industry grew and faded away, and how valuable they were in the early years, how they helped settle this area, how they helped bring in industry and economics. And they were such a great piece of the history of this area. And now, like everything else in history, things die out. So we appreciate you listening. And if you have any other questions, we're here to answer them. As far as sheep herding goes, when you're looking at trailing sheep and that sort of thing, probably the furthest east, I mean, they were in Arizona, Colorado, Montana, that section, but that's probably about it. Once you start getting into the Midwest, then you're talking about having them actually on a farm rather than trailing sheep and grazing sheep in ranches. Oh, I'd love to talk about the sheep. What do you want to say about the sheepdogs? Yeah.
Many in flock their time. It was 2000. Tom's place. Remember going past there years ago, and it's the end of the box. So.
And the
Thank,
breeds,
thank you, sir.
what breeds did you see as?
Australian shepherds, you know, and border collies.
Mixed. Then later on, that's when they started introducing the Great Pyrenees. And the Great Pyrenees, the big white ones, and they're more of a protector dog. They're not really a herding dog.
Right.
They're there to be raised with the sheep, so they think they're part of the flock, and they're very defensive of the flock.
Right.
And they do ask that whenever they're such gorgeous big dogs, and you know, they're just you want to go up and hug them.
No, yeah. Keep it busy.
Yeah, they're there to protect the flock.
When I worked at Bodie, I'd be driving up and down, and those huge dogs would be chasing after the car. Okay, Barry McPherson. Love the sheep bosses from Bakersfield coming to my grandmother Venita McPherson's Mono Inn with the families in their big cars for enjoyment of the dining room and bar. We could hear them partying till the inn closed at 2 a.m. With windows open, we could hear the favourites playing over and over on the jukebox. On lucky nights, our mother Virginia Barry McPherson waited tables, and we kids got to hang out in the inn. Big JB, can't pronounce the name. Okay. Wearing his 10-gallon hat was our favourite. Also enjoyed having the inn and our house surrounded by flocks being moved through periodically with a big mule in the lead, wearing a loud bell and packing the tent and food, and the dogs helping the lone herder move the flock past our place. Have seen many arboglyphs in the crake and aspen trees on the property and elsewhere in the Sierra and up in eastern Oregon. A big sheep industry event attended by locals, including my parents and grandma and us kids. Every fall was the shearing out at Conway Ranch at the northwest corner of Mono Basin. Red wine flowed freely, meat was grilled, and sheep were loaded on many trucks headed for Bakersfield. Dewey Livingston, thank you. A perfect accompaniment to the Arboglyphs seminar last year. Lee's iPad, excellent presentation, thank you. Suzanne Shelton, thank you. We remember the Mono Lake Committee tour years ago, so memorable. And Chris Spiller, thank you for a great program. Are there any other questions? The question is, any chance of more sheep coming back to the area?
The sheep industry is as far as open range and that sort of thing, is pretty much dead. I mean, that's the truth. There's very, very few left. If somebody wanted to, it is more common now for people to have family sheep operations, just family farming with sheep. So that might be a possibility if somebody were, because this is a nice area for that. But that'd be about all I would expect. Yeah. 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 We were just discussing beforehand that there was an article and there is a family, the same family who used to come into Twin Lakes is Borda family, and he does take his sheep into areas that have burned, and they take them in the very early in the spring, and they eat all the green cheatgrass, which is your main problem, and they take that down, and you have to do it for at least 3 or 4 years because that cheatgrass just keeps coming up, but you can use sheep for that. Yeah.
Okay, a few more comments here. Mary Young, who sheared all those tons of wool? Were there organized teams of shearers?
Okay. The shearers is a whole, I mean, we could do a whole program on the shearers. Various different shearers came from various different countries in various different areas over many, many years. And they were very well trained in the early years. They just used hand shearers, and it would take long periods of time. But there is a knack to it. There is a knack to shearing sheep. It's the way you handle them. You can't cut too much. If you get them too bloody, you're a terrible shearer. You have to get as much wool off that animal as possible. So it was a whole separate industry. And many of the ranchers got very good at it themselves, but they almost always brought in professional shearers. So that's a whole separate industry.
Yeah. Okay, Barry McPherson. Emily Strauss. Fantastic talk. Great research. Wow. What breed are those white-faced sheep shown in many photos? Don't know. What? White-faced sheep. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Barry McPherson. In recent years, I've seen flocks with Peruvian herders on the east side of Crowley Lake and the south side of Mono Lake. Any info you can offer about this?
So the Peruvian herders on the east side of Crowley Lake would probably belong to the Itua company. I knew I would butcher that. Leave it to Abbas to correct me. Yeah, so they have a sheep camp just to the east of Crowley Lake, and yeah, I recall on one of our canoe trips across Crowley Lake to get to those columns, we saw a whole band of sheep come down to water at the lake, and you can always identify, other than a windstorm, you see a plume of dust in the distance. There might be a sheep band underneath that dust. Yeah. As far as let's see, Mono Lake. Yeah, they're probably out of Bakersfield. Again, there's some independent sheep operators that still. It could be still. What was that again?
Itureria.
Okay. Thank you. I think there's a couple of permittees still on the Mono Mills Creators area as well. And like Nancy said, we're busy working on a sheep stock tank, a watering tank that's become a bulletin board, a sketch pad, and a visitor sign-in for sheep herders, predominantly from Mendelbros operations, but other sheep companies stretching back almost 100 years. So if anybody's interested in volunteering for that effort, it's taken us 3 summers just to finish the bottom section of this tank. We still have 2 more sections to go. Yeah, it's in the Mono Basin. It's just slightly south of Mono Mills. Pretty incredible archaeological resource.
While we're in the Mono Mills area and just south of Mono Lake, in the early 1990s, Ellen brought me over here camping many times. And one time we were south of Mono Lake. And I said, what's all that white stuff? It's like 2 foot high. I got on all these trees. Has somebody been painting the trees? And obviously the sheep had been rubbing themselves against the pine trees. And that must have been pretty much the end of the sheep coming through in the early 1990s. Yeah. Okay. Mary Young again. There are big flocks of fine wool in the Warner Mountains up north. All wool is sold to Pendleton. One photo showed black faces. I'm assuming that's the sheep. What breed? Blackface sheep. Okay. All right, Suzanne Scholfeld again. It's Glass Creek Valley behind June Lake.
That area around June Lake, I mentioned Alger Lake, was also part of Mendelbros allotments. He may have extended into the Glass Creek area. There are a number of arborglyphs still remaining there. Some of the names of the herders that we've seen in other areas. Upper Horse Meadow, Lower Horse Meadow. I'm pretty sure it would be his operation. I think the dates are the 50s and 60s. So
that's the end of the questions online. Any other questions in the room? That's not a question. Let me just finish with Alkali and our speakers tonight who've been wonderful. It's been a great event. Thank you so much. And our next speaker in July will be
David Woodruff and his wife will be here. They've come almost every year to do a different performance historic presentation. And this next month, that means it's July. It's July 1st. He's going to come as Death Valley Scotty. And we heard him last October and I went, this has got to be one of the best he's ever done. And if you think any of his, that's saying something. So put that on July 7th, first Monday in July, July 7th. And same day, if you can come forward, this is a great crowd for these guys. I'm so happy you all came. This is a great speaking tradition that we've established now for many years, and every month, and almost every month of the year. So come next month and see David. Death Valley Scotty.
Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. We had 35 in the room. I don't know how many online. 29 online. So that's pretty good for our little society. Thank you very much for coming. Good night.